Good afternoon, everyone. If you are looking for Smithsonian Learning Lab office hours, then you are in the right place. My name is Ashley Naranjo. I'm from the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. And for the next hour, we'll be sharing really answers to any questions that you have. So feel free to use the chat button to share your questions. This is a new feature that we've been adding every week on Tuesdays. We have office hours. So with that, I'm going to share my screen really quick and we'll go through a little bit of the logistics and then get started. So first, like I said, Ashley Naranjo, Manager of Educator Engagement here at the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access in Washington, D.C. Online office hours happen every Tuesday from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. You can always double check at learninglab.si.edu/about/events to double check who will be hosting office hours and if they're on. We have them scheduled through October, so feel free to pop in and out or tell a friend. And often a lot of the questions have to do with recommendations for finding a perfect image or video or museum resource, or even just getting a tour or an orientation to the Smithsonian Learning Lab site itself. No question too big or too small. You can use the chat box to the right of the video on YouTube. I know sometimes it's depending on your computer screen, it might be to the right, just below, or on the side of the screen where I'm speaking right now. So that chat box is available there, and you can continue to include any type of question that you have right there in that chat box. And if you're not able to do so, if you're not familiar with kind of the Google suite of tools, you can also just email us at learninglab.si.edu, and that'll be a place where you can also ask your questions. And finally, if you're tweeting about your teaching experiences once you've used the Learning Lab, we would love to hear from you. We're pretty active on Twitter. Often we share great tips from other teachers, ways that fellow museum educators have used the Learning Lab. So it's a great tool to be able to kind of share experiences using the lab and digital museum resources. So we're at Smithsonian Lab. And so we'll get started. Again, the Smithsonian Learning Lab, learninglab.si.edu. We just updated our homepage, so you've probably seen it since this summer. It looks something like this. And I'll switch over to double check if we have any questions. Again, if you just joined us, you can actually just type in the chat any questions that you might have, and no question too big, too small. So feel free to type a question if you have one. In past office hours that we've held, we've answered everything from, do you have music resources? And of course, Smithsonian Folkways Recordings is a great resource for that. Also Spanish language resources, which that's certainly a growing collection, especially for Hispanic Heritage Month. I know a lot of folks were interested in that. So again, feel free to type in the chat if you have any questions. I have no planned agenda, so really you can ask questions there in the chat, and we'll go from there. All right, so it looks like we have our first question. Um, Marianne says, hey, Ashley, just sent a question via Twitter, but here goes. Thanks for putting it in both places too, Marianne. What do you guys have for NASA for their 60th? And also looking for sources on Panama for Catholic educators. Oh, well, those are two great questions. I was just peeking at Twitter too and saw your question. So thanks for putting it in both places though, so people can see it. So the first thing, the first question, and I'll go ahead and share my screen so you can see the Learning Lab. I'll just pull that up. Give me 1 second. There we go. All right, we are set. So here we are at learninglab.si.edu. And the first question was about any resources pertaining to NASA for their 60th anniversary. So I think the Learning Lab is an especially useful tool for anniversaries, big commemorations. A lot of times I take a peek at the Google Doodle and see what big anniversaries or major figures in history that they're commemorating, and take a peek at what the Learning Lab has. If you search for NASA, for example, so you'll get a ton of resources. You may want to also refine your search. I would say, certainly the Air and Space Museum, maybe even Smithsonian Magazine and Air and Space Museum archives to start. So if we update our search a little bit, we'll start to see all sorts of cool things. This is a poster from NASA with Snoopy, which is kind of kind of interesting. You can also go back. Let's see what else they have. All sorts of posters, it looks like, for sure. But then also things, artifacts, pins. A lot of people don't know, but the Air and Space Museum also has a lot of the watercolors and sketches too. And so this has really strong descriptive data, metadata that you can take a peek at too. So I think this is kind of an interesting collection item too that you might not have been aware of. So yeah, so really, what I would suggest is first kind of searching NASA and then kind of refining your search based on those resource providers like I did. But then I would also suggest kind of being more specific too. If you're looking for, for here, for example, it's Apollo 16 or a specific person or, anything like that. If you can give a little bit more description, you can start to get this kind of search result down to a more manageable collection for yourself. But then what's nice too is you can also take a peek at some of the Learning Lab collections that exist. And so here there's a teacher who's created a spacesuit design challenge, Don Kingman, who I believe is an artist. Let's double check. Let's see what we've got here. So he's an American watercolorist. And what's interesting, his connection, let's see what his connection is to, he was part of the NASA art program as well. So also kind of having that interdisciplinary approach where you can actually kind of connect from, a very often science type commemoration to something that has an art connection too. So that's really interesting. Let's see what else. Women's history. This is an interesting collection about an exhibition that's about to come about with, it's called Destination Moon, and that's through the Smithsonian Traveling Exhibition Service too. So lots of resources and videos about working at NASA and what that was like, as well as Executive Order 10925. So all sorts of different resources, connections to history, science, and art, and really a great topic to kind of dive into as you're thinking about how to connect to the commemoration. So hopefully that was helpful, Marianne. She says, excellent. For Panama, looking for resources, to teach K through 12 teachers on cultural highlights and music. Love the art connection in the NASA sources. Yeah, that was kind of fun for me too, actually. I didn't know what we would find. I knew for sure that Air and Space Museum had some resources, but that was kind of fun to see the variety of resources that were available. In terms of Panama, again, we could search, kind of for the country itself and see what comes up. My guess is with Panama especially, we have, the Smithsonian has a tropical research institute that's located in Panama. So lots of scientific research that's been going on there for decades. And so that might also come up. But then thinking about some of the cultural resources or things about music, you might want to hone it just a little bit too. And so let's see too what we can find. Let's see. You might want to also be more specific. Sometimes too, if we know a specific artist or if we know kind of something a little bit more specific than just the country, we might be able to get some better results. Because here, for example, this is specifically from the National Zoo, and they have a video about the Panama Amphibian Rescue and Conservation Project too. So kind of thinking through, how we might refine our search. And that's also kind of part of the fun too with some of these queries where we're starting to think of how would we connect students to these objects, to these images. What are the connections, both expected and sometimes unexpected too. This is actually one of our favorite videos. A colleague here and I'm not sure that it'll load right here. It's called Claws Out, Fiddler Crabs Do Battle. And it's from, you'll have to watch it on YouTube, but it's a great little video that kind of shows fiddler crabs in the wild. So that's kind of fun. But thinking more back to the culture and to the music piece of things, we might have to think through with perhaps folkways. I'm trying to think of other, let's see if there's, specifically some resources. Music of the Indians of Panama. And so you can start to see how really good search terms might be the right fit. Even for Hispanic Heritage Month too, you might think about, some of the artwork too, which is kind of really interesting. A Panama hat, I believe, yeah. And some photographs. Panama in February. There's some blog posts. And then of course, airline advertisements, sound recordings, information about the Panama Canal. So again, what I love about the Learning Lab is the ability to kind of have these history connections, culture, arts, and science connections all within a given topic. So what's nice about that too is students can start to see kind of, based on their own interests, certain connections that they might have to a given topic. So it's just interesting to kind of search in this way. Not sure necessarily what you'll find, but a great way to kind of connect commemorations, like you said, Marianne. I loved the NASA example too, because I think that really kind of demonstrated the types of resources that we have. I'll keep thinking too about the Panama connection. I know you were especially interested in that for World Youth Day for Catholic schools, so something that I'll continue to think about. If you've just joined us too, we are answering questions about the Smithsonian Learning Lab, so no question too big or too small. You can certainly in the chat write any of your responses there. So far, we've had a question about the 60th anniversary of NASA, as well as commemorations. So for example, World Youth Day in Panama, and making some connections there. The Latino Center is another great place to, Marianne, to take a peek at. Both Folkways and the Latino Center are two great resources from the Smithsonian that you might be able to bring in within the collections too. So, and Marianne says, thanks so much. I'll look to design something via the Learning Lab. Yeah, no, I think that's a great great option for starting to curate too. And I think we mentioned this in previous office hours too, but what's nice about the Learning Lab is if you're not finding exactly what you need in the, I think it's over 3 million. Let's see how many resources. If you click this button, it'll show you we're just about 3 million resources from across the Smithsonian, and that's images, videos, it's audio, it's podcasts, it's text, text like, primary sources, things like diaries and letters, but also really great blog posts and lesson plans that are already kind of pre-packaged. But yeah, so we're already at that 3 million resource, or very close to 3 million resources. But if you can't find what you're looking for within those 3 million resources, you're also able to build collections where you can include external resources from across the internet. We just ask that you cite them too. So sometimes if you're not finding exactly what you're looking for, being able to kind of combine Smithsonian resources with other resources is really a great way to go. So something to think about as well. Excellent. I know we have some folks coming in and out too, so I'll just be here ready for any other questions. If there's things that you have questions about, feel free to use the chat on the right-hand side of the screen to be able to ask a question. It looks like we have some new folks here that are joining. Here in office hours, really, we've kind of thus far gone through some commemorations. So we searched for NASA in preparation for NASA's 60th anniversary. We also took a peek at resources related to Panamanian culture and arts as World Youth Day comes up for Catholic school educators. But feel free to ask a question in the chat box. There you can ask any question you'd like, and we'll try to answer it. We'll do some searches together and be able to see what we find. If you're just joining us, my name is Ashley Naranjo. I'm from the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. We're about 20 minutes into office hours. Every Tuesday, we do office hours where we have no planned agenda. So please feel free to ask any questions. No question too big or too small. We'll try to answer it. And if I can't, then I'll certainly follow up with my colleagues to see how we can best support you in your use of digital museum resources. So far, we've answered questions about commemorations, which I think is a great idea as far as starting to think about what to search for and how you might use it in the classroom. We found some cool artwork from NASA in preparation for the 60th anniversary of NASA. We also found some things related to Panamanian culture and the arts. So if you're just joining us, please feel free to ask any questions and we'll kind of discover together too. Certainly you can ask questions about what resources we might have. I can certainly walk you through that. Or if you're in need of an orientation for the Learning Lab and how to get started, I can certainly help with that too. It's a resource that's really pretty flexible for teachers and students to conduct research. So, it's really kind of a nice tool to be able to pick and choose what you're interested in from across the Smithsonian, which has, over 19 museums, 9 research centers, and the National Zoo. So there's a lot of different topics and disciplines that are covered within the Smithsonian. Again, if you're just joining us, office hours is really an open forum. So I know a few people have kind of come in and out. Maybe you're just finding us on Twitter. Feel free to ask questions within the chat box on the right-hand side. There's no planned agenda, so it'll be based on what your questions are. If you're just joining us, this is the Smithsonian Learning Lab's online office hours. You can feel free to ask any question you'd like about the Learning Lab, no question too big or small. We certainly have over close to 3 million resources right now and thousands of Learning Lab collections. So if you're just getting started or want help in how to get started, I can certainly help you with an orientation, or if you have a specific question about the types of resources that we have. Thus far, we've gone over NASA, for example, in terms of the upcoming anniversary. The 60th anniversary is coming up. So we had a teacher ask a question about which resources we might have. And it was great to kind of find that we had history resources, science resources, and of course, some surprising resources too of the NASA art program as well. So some great connections from, the National Air and Space Museum, but then also some other great historical records as well. So feel free to ask a question in the chat, and we'll answer any questions that you have. If you're just joining us, again, you can ask a question in the right-hand side of the chat. Um, We've got just about close to 3 million resources. So you can certainly use those to build new collections of resources for your students on just about any topic. If you're looking for resources to a specific topic, something that you might have to teach in the next week or so, we can certainly look for those together and start to think about how you might refine your search. There's also, we can also go through some of the technical features of the lab, some of the more advanced features. There's a lot of different tools that you can use to enhance what's there as far as the digital museum resources. So ask your questions, don't be shy. There's a chat box to the right of the screen that you can connect with. So any questions, feel free to shout out in the chat box, and we'll kind of do a tutorial or a screen share for you so that you can see exactly how we might tackle the question that you have. As you're watching, just let us know if you have any questions. On the right-hand side, there's a chat box to YouTube. If you don't have an account and are still looking to ask a question, you can certainly email us at learninglab@si.edu, and I can pull that up for you in just a second. So feel free to email us, learninglab@si.edu, or of course you can use the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. Thus far, Marianne had some great questions about how to kind of connect to major anniversaries. Often I do searches for things that are in, Google Doodles, or if I read it in the newspaper or even on Twitter, it says, on this day. I'm always curious what I'll find as far as Smithsonian resources. There's over 3 million resources that are available from the Smithsonian Learning Lab. So it's certainly a great place to kind of start to find some of those great nuggets within history or art or science or culture. So certainly can search within the Learning Lab there. We had some great questions thus far. So if you're watching and you're interested in asking a question, please feel free to do so in the chat. Hi there, if you're just joining us, this is the Smithsonian Learning Lab online office hours. So we don't have an agenda, but we're looking forward to answering any of your questions. You can do so by, you can ask a question by using the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. And there you can ask any question you'd like about the Smithsonian Learning Lab. No question too big or too small. So feel free to type in a question. Maybe you're new to the Learning Lab and you want a tour of the Learning Lab, or maybe you're, an old pro at this and looking for some advanced features that we could help you out with. There's close to 3 million digital museum resources that are available. So in the right-hand side of the chat, feel free to ask about specific topics that you might be teaching in the upcoming weeks, or anything that is of interest that I can help you with. My name is Ashley Naranjo. I'm the Manager of Educator Engagement here at the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. So feel free to write in the chat and I'll answer any questions that you might have. If you're just joining us, we are kind of just about halfway through online office hours. We had some great questions earlier in the hour about resources for NASA's 60th anniversary. And so we did a quick search together and found some really interesting resources, both kind of historical records, but then also about the specific missions, and then even some artwork too. So it was a really great kind of session to start to think about refining searches and kind of honing searches when they're larger terms like NASA, for example. And then we also started to refine our search based on resource provider as well. So some great options as far as resources that you could use to celebrate NASA's 60th anniversary. But feel free to ask a question in the chat box. There's no question that's too big or small. So feel free to ask a question there. You'll see Marianne had some questions there, and I even wrote a little note so that you'll see exactly where the chat box is. And we can start from there. If you'd like a tour of the Learning Lab or want to learn about different functions or technical features, I guess, of the Learning Lab, feel free to ask and we'd be happy to help. If you're just joining us, you can certainly ask a question to the right of this screen, and we can walk you through how to use the Learning Lab. If there's specific resources you're looking for, say something you have to teach in the upcoming weeks, feel free to ask a question in the chat, and we can go from there. What I have up now on the screen is the Learning Lab homepage. And so this was actually recently upgraded and updated based on teacher feedback. So as you scroll through, you can start to see the different ways you can interact with the site. For example, Discover allows you to search for both resources as well as collections. There's different profiles on the types of users that the Smithsonian Learning Lab has. So everything from educators, curriculum developers, librarians and media specialists, museum educators, learners, parents. And so you can look through both those kind of quotes, but then also see collections by these individuals too. You can browse individual resources by type. So if you're looking for a podcast, let's say, or a video, you can refine your search in that way. You can also look by subject area too. So certainly a lot of social studies resources are available, language arts, science, the arts, or you can browse all collections. And collections are really groups of resources that have been created either by teachers, so Learning Lab users, or museum educators. There's kind of a wide variety of collections that are available. You too can create a collection too. So it's free. You just need a Learning Lab account and then you can really get started. As you're finding resources, you can use them almost like a clipboard for your own research or for students to do some research as well. You can start to curate those resources based on a variety of needs. You can also use tools to start to annotate with hotspots, for example, to point out specific details. You can add quizzes and assessments. And then you can also take a peek at some of the already created collections too. So there's topical collections, which are really kind of aggregations on a given topic or theme. Teacher collections, which are most closely associated with a lesson plan that you might be used to. And then student activities, which is basically things that you could hand to a student right away. And a lot of times we see teachers using the Learning Lab in a flipped format so that students can go through those activities and then discuss these activities within class too. So really, it's a great tool. Also here we have some collections around learning strategies or themes. So there's the visible thinking routines from Project Zero. There's historical thinking skills, design thinking. There's the Cooper Hewitt Museum, National Design Museum in New York, who's created collections and also has had teens and students create collections. And then if you're participating in National History Day, which is a national competition, it's a research competition for students in secondary classrooms, we've got resources for that too that you can take a peek at as well. I should mention too, you can certainly share your collections. You can make them public and searchable within the Learning Lab so that it might help another teacher who's probably teaching just about the same topic as you. You can also embed your collection. So oftentimes a lot of librarians like to do that if there's a specific commemoration or, for example, a holiday. I know a librarian in Pittsburgh created a collection about Veterans Day and then posted that on the library's homepage so that students, as they were waiting for everybody to get settled, could have something to kind of peruse as they're starting to talk about a given topic. You can also share these collections online or assign them to your students if they also have user accounts. So there's some features where you can actually create a roster within the Learning Lab as well of your students. And then finally, we certainly have blogs. So here you see there's strategies to engage young children. There's Triumph and Tragedy digital resources for National History Day. And this was a great blog by one of our users, actually, who led first generation college students through campus tours and used a lot of the visual vocabularies that you see there in collections to be able to prepare them for those tours. You can also sign up for our Bright Ideas newsletter. So it's very simple to do so. If you're already a registered user, you should be receiving these notices. And so, for example, one of our most recent issues was about National History Day, and it featured specific collections and had a blog post associated with it. So it's really kind of just in time, great resources that have been curated on given topics too. I should mention tomorrow we'll also be having an arts integration webinar. I'll be joined by my colleague at the American Art Museum, Phoebe Hilleman, and she and I are going to model a few strategies for arts integration, show some examples, but you can also find upcoming workshops across the country that we've been leading and watch archives of recent events. And then, of course, there's online office hours every Tuesday at 4 p.m. So please feel free to join us and ask questions too. On the right of the screen, there is a chat box, or you can certainly email us at learninglab.si.edu. And you can ask us your questions. So no question too big or too small. Feel free to ask a question. In the right-hand side, there's that chat box, and that's where you can ask a question, whether it's about resources specifically, tools, digital museum resources. Maybe there's an upcoming topic that you're about to teach this upcoming week. Please feel free to type into the chat, and I'll do a little quick brainstorming with you to think about ways that we might be able to use Smithsonian resources and the Smithsonian Learning Lab to help support your teaching. So feel free to type any questions in the chat. If you've played around with the Learning Lab and you have a specific question, I'd be happy to help. So. I should mention that there's no real planned agenda, so we have just about 15 minutes left. But if you'd like, I can share just an example too. I mentioned National History Day earlier. So here's an example from my colleague Phoebe, who will be joining me for the Arts Integration webinar. Here's a collection from Phoebe that features the theme, which is Triumph and Tragedy in American Art. And she's done something really interesting where she's created kind of sub-themes, ideas for research for students. So here she asks some essential questions within her description, and then also provides supporting resources for students. In her case, these are often artworks, but she's also included a website, again, a portrait, and then also some information from Archives of American Art, for example. And this looks like it was an exhibition catalog, actually. And then she's also taken a variety of different themes throughout history, too. So she included George Catlin's Indian Gallery. She included the expansion of the railroad and both the impacts, both triumphs and tragedies across America. She looked at the New Deal in 1934 and the Works Progress Administration. as well as the path to African American civil rights here too. So lots of great resources here, all at your fingertips. If you're not comfortable with creating a collection just yet and you're starting from scratch, this is a great way to kind of look at how someone else has curated a collection, and then also pick and choose what's relevant to you. Once you have a Learning Lab account, you can also make copies of collections. So if you make a copy, then you can also save it to your own account and adapt based on your own needs. So you can add some things, take some things away, and it'll still revert back to the original owner of the collection. There'll be kind of a trail that says that your collection was adapted from there. So it's still giving credit to the original author. We have just about 10 more minutes left. So I just wanted to remind folks, if you have any questions, anything that you'd like answered, now is the time to ask. On the right-hand side of the chat, there is or the right-hand side of the video, excuse me, there's a chat box where you can ask questions. We've gone through a variety of different topics, including Panamanian culture. We also looked at what the Smithsonian has for NASA's 60th anniversary. And even just now, we went through the homepage, as well as thinking about arts integration, which is kind of a preview for tomorrow's webinar with Phoebe Hilleman from the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So if you have a question, please feel free to add it to the chat box. I'm just taking a peek. It looks like we haven't gotten any questions. There's no planned agenda for this session, so if you do have a question, please feel free to type it into the chat box and we'll get to all of your questions hopefully by the end of this session. I should mention too that office hours are every Tuesday, so if you can't think of a question now, but certainly want to ask us again, every Tuesday from 4 to 5 p.m., there'll be someone from the Smithsonian Learning Lab team here to be able to support you in whatever you might need. You can also always ask a question using our feedback button too. And I'll just show you what that looks like too. It's actually on every single page of the Learning Lab. So even if we went to the home page, which I'll show you here, if you click on that question mark, you can submit feedback. So maybe you have a great idea for how the Learning Lab could be better as far as helping you do your work more efficiently, an idea for a tool or a question about a specific resource. That's also an area where you can ask questions too. Just taking a peek, it looks like we don't have any more questions. So for about the next 10 minutes, I'm still available if you have questions or comments or ways that you've used the Learning Lab, some successes or challenges. Please feel free to include that in the chat box as well. Oh, great. We have a question. Wonderful. Hi, Lauren. So Lauren asks, hi, Ashley. I was wondering if you ever partner with other organizations to create resources. Such a great question, Lauren. Right now, really the Learning Lab is open to anyone. So what's really interesting is that not only Smithsonian museums, of course, museum educators from those museums, but also teachers from across the country have been using it. We've also found that affiliate museums, so for example, the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh has used it to support some of their workshops. So whenever they kind of create a schedule of workshops for the upcoming year, they also create a companion Learning Lab collection. So all the resources from that workshop are in one place. We've also worked with the California State Parks as well. So rangers are working on creating collections that they can also embed into their own websites. And then even for National History Day, for example, we're partnering with the Ford Theater too. So they're creating a collection about triumph and tragedy, which of course Ford Theater has tons of resources on. So there's really kind of both formal partnerships that we can have between organizations, and then also organizations are able to use the free tool that's available to them as well. I'll show you an example of what it looks like. Let's see. So for example, the Heinz History Center. Let's see. We'll search for Pittsburgh. And we get 2,000 resources, and these are individual resources that are found from each of the museums, and you can refine your search on the left-hand side based on museum or the type of resource. But then if we go over to the second tab, Learning Lab Collections, here's an example of a resource where really instead of an author name, they've created the Heinz History Center Education Department profile. And then here we can find all of the collections that they've created over time. Some of them are related to using oral histories. Here's an example, labor history. And then they've also created some collections, like I said, National History Day, Roberto Clemente. And what they've done is not only used Smithsonian resources, so here you see National Portrait Gallery, as well as Postal Museum, but then they've also used resources from their own archives too. So here, this is actually one that they've uploaded from their library and archives, so that they can live both, Smithsonian resources as well as the local resources. For this topic specifically, Roberto Clemente, it makes a lot of sense that they would, include those local resources too from their archives. And then we also have, for example, a video, Smithsonian Magazine. So really just a great way to be able to combine resources. But let's take a peek. So you also had another question, or I may have missed this at the beginning. I don't want to be redundant. How do you create a resource? Oh, great. So let's think of a topic. We'll do, I don't know, pollution. So when we search for something like pollution, let's say, we can kind of search through the rich resources. A lot of these are images from our archive center. As you can see, there's also, a button here. So maybe, we have specific interests. We can kind of go through some of these results. We can also hone our search too, so that you can kind of see the resource provider, the image type, resource type. So do we want images? Are we looking more for videos? But once we find a resource that's really interesting to us, and let's see. Let's see. We'll do this one. This is kind of interesting. It's an aerial view documenting pollution in Panama. So this photograph is especially interesting. Once you go into a resource, you can zoom in and out. You can also view the information about that image on the left-hand side of the screen. But by getting a free account, both users as individuals and users that are organizations, for example, can add this resource to a collection. So you would just create a collection. These are collections that I've already created. And let's, give it a name. photographs and documentation, you have to spell it correctly, right? Of pollution. Okay, and then I can always add a description of this collection later, but I'll create a collection. And now this collection that I've created is available. I can click on the sunburst, click on collections, and because I have a lot, it might take a little while. So these are all my published collections, but then I also have a tab of unpublished collections, including that one that we just created together. So that first resource is the resource that I've searched for and found. And then I can edit the collection. I can do things like add other resources too. So maybe I've found several other resources that I wanted to add. We'll just say we'll add a few here that might be sort of relevant. I can move these back and forth too, so I can reorder them if I want to kind of scaffold it in a certain way. And then on this image, I also have the ability, while I'm in editing mode, you know you're in editing mode when there's a green band on the top of the screen, I can start to annotate my collection, or my resource, excuse me. So I could add additional information. Maybe it's a prompt, like a looking prompt, or maybe it's more context for the image that the museum might not have offered, but I want to offer for students. I can also add quiz questions side by side with the actual resource. So you have the option to do true and false, multiple choice, short answer, long answer, or submit a file in response. So perhaps you also want students to take a picture of their neighborhood and document that. And then you can also have the option to add image hotspots. And so specifically on images, mostly photographs of that are, born digital, but also artifacts, you can point out specific details. And so you can kind of create a box here, and you can add a title and a description to point out specific details. A lot of times things like maps are especially important, or complex photographs or artworks. You might want to direct students' attention to specific details. So that's really a great way to be able to do so. You can also change it so it looks like this or like this. Or you can do a highlight where the rest of the screen is darkened and that one is kind of shines through. And then you can also do targets too. I often tell students not to do the targets on people, but photographs, certainly it kind of pinpoints specific points of interest within a photograph too. When that's all said and done, you can save and exit. And now as you're viewing your collection, you can start to notice that there's some annotations on that specific resource. So, I would have done the quiz questions, and here my hotspot would show up as well. So those are just some options that you have as far as kind of interactivity that you can add. You can also, back in edit mode, you can update your description here too. So you can say, kind of more context about what this collection is and what teachers might be using it for. You can tag it to subject areas. So sometimes things are more than one subject too. So this might be, an earth and space science collection, but it also might have a writing prompt too that we want to include. Age levels, again, because it's an international platform, so that can support it. And then educational features as well, and then standards. So that's kind of fun. You can actually search through the standards, both kind of, these are national standards, so you can kind of go in this tree format where you kind of know exactly which standard you're looking for, or you can search based on a given, search term. So for example, if they're writing an essay, I could do point of view, and it'll give me all of the national standards that have to do with point of view. And so I can see there's some that are in ELA, but also I'm pretty sure there's a few that are also social studies standards too. So that's also an option. The last thing I wanted to show before We do have to leave, and certainly from 4 to 5 o'clock every Tuesday, we're here. So if you have another question, feel free to tune in next week. Is to add a resource from an external organization. So, for example, Lauren, if your resource or if your organization has resources on a given topic that would complement especially well with Smithsonian resources, here's the place you would do it. You can upload files. And we just ask that you cite them appropriately, or you can contribute websites. So it'll take a screen grab of a resource, and then it will link to that resource too. So there's some options there that you can have your own resource alongside Smithsonian resources as well. I hope that helped, Lauren. Thanks so much for your question. Feel free to reach out to us too at learninglab.si.edu. I'll pull that screen up for you guys too so that you have it. Let's see. Here's our email address, learninglab@si.edu. It was great to spend the afternoon with folks. Again, feel free to reach out to us both here during office hours every Tuesday from 4 to 5 p.m. or through email. We're happy to help and get you started in the Learning Lab or help you with some of those more advanced features. With that, thanks so much, everyone, and look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.